When talking about freedom, you mention responsibility. Isn't responsibility an obstacle to freedom? To answer your question, we need to understand 4 factors: freedom, responsibility, control, and discipline. Jai Prabhuji, hello everybody. We are starting today the second article about the topic of freedom. And Prabhuji will take us now into exploration into 4 terms in order to answer the question that we just heard in relation to the relation between responsibility and freedom. Is it responsibility is going to disturb our freedom? And in order to answer, again, we are going to examine with Prabhuji 4 terms. What is really freedom? What is really responsibility? What is discipline? And what is control? Prabhuji tells us that all these terms are relevant in order to answer this question, to address this inquiry. And as oftentimes with the teachings of this path, we are likely to find meaning or perspectives regarding this term that we might have overlooked in our ordinary perception of these terms. Generally, people think that freedom is the ability to do whatever they want without any limitations. They believe that freedom means choosing and deciding without restrictions. This notion, however, does not recognize the responsibility that freedom entails. As the Argentinian writer Jorge Bucay said, the true seeker grows and learns and discovers that he or she is always primarily responsible for whatever happens. Bucay is right. The freedom to make conscious decisions always comes with responsibility. Freedom is responsibility and vice versa. George Bernard Shaw said, "Liberty means responsibility. That is why most men dread it. Responsibility means consciously accepting the consequences of our choices." So Prabhuji's words start with an answer, with the short answer. Oftentimes we get from Prabhuji the short answer, and then we are going to understand it better through the words that will be presented later on. The short answer is responsibility not only is not an obstacle to freedom, but it is interrelated. They are both interconnected, responsibility and freedom. Prabhuji says, in fact, that freedom without responsibility is the false notion that we have regarding this word. We said that we might have different perceptions about this term that we are exploring in this article. 4 terms, again, freedom, responsibility, discipline, and control. And through this word, we might be exposed to deeper meaning. And this is the first example. Prabhuji tells us, oftentimes when we say freedom, the notion that we have is that we can just do whatever we want, without restrictions, without limitations. And that this notion is incomplete. That true freedom includes responsibility. That there is no freedom without responsibility. I think that Prabhuji brings to our awareness here, to our attention, that to do actions without consequences cannot be considered freedom, because this is an immature perspective of life. We think of freedom that we can just feel free, that we can feel without limitations. But this is not real freedom, not complete freedom. And I think that in this notion that we have regarding freedom, that is just to be, to feel free, as minds, as egos, as bodies, we want to feel free without limitations. We are ignoring in a way the law of cause and effect. We want to do actions without consequences. And of course, this is not realistic in this world that we live in, and it's not intelligent to pursue such freedom, to recognize freedom as something like this, because this conduct, to act in life without considering the consequences, as we already know very well, is not going to bring us happiness and peace and a feeling of freedom, but more limitations in the end. We know that only children can think that they can do whatever they want without consequences. We as mature people cannot expect that this will benefit our life. So Prabhuji says, usually we think about freedom as no limitations, but really freedom includes responsibility. And in this examination of the first notion that we have regarding the concept of freedom, what is freedom? What we want when we speak about freedom, Prabhuji brings us into a closer analysis of our desire for freedom also, and tells us as bodies, as minds, we cannot pursue freedom. And in this context, I would like to bring two Sanskrit terms that speak about this point, that the material platform, in the material platform, freedom does not exist. In the level of the mind, of the body, of the senses, there is no freedom. We are limited. There are consequences to what we do. And these two terms, one is bhogatyaga, which stands for sense enjoyment and renunciation of the sense enjoyment. So bhoga is the sense enjoyment and tyaga is the renunciation. And what these terms explains to us is that in the material life, we cannot just enjoy unlimitedly. We might think or imagine that what we want is a continuous enjoyment and that this is what we perceive as sense gratification. But really, in the level of sense gratification, there will be enjoyment and renunciation. Enjoyment and renunciation. Because we cannot continue to enjoy, again, with this vehicle. For example, we will eat one ice cream and then we can eat two ice cream. At a certain point, this enjoyment will turn into torture. We cannot enjoy more. This vehicle does not fit this activity. So we have to renounce. And then we can move to another type of sense gratification. We need to alternate. If we just want to enjoy life, we are alternating between different activities, sense enjoyment and renunciation, sense enjoyment and renunciation. And what it actually tells us, which leads us to the second term that I wanted to bring in this relation, that is our enjoyment in this level of the matter is very flickering. And the term is chapala-sukha, which means flickering happiness. So our happiness is not long-lasting. It is not substantial. It's flickering. We can enjoy a little bit food and then we have to stop. We said we cannot continue. We will only suffer. So then we want to enjoy some siesta. Then we want to shift to something else. Then we can read a little bit, watch movie, take dessert. We need to shift from activity to activity, but all this is fragile because soon we will need to replace it with another sense gratification. We don't really manage to experience the happiness that we pursue with these actions, or the freedom that we pursue with these actions. So the point that we are making, the happiness and the freedom in the material level is not the freedom on which Prabhuji talks about. The freedom on which Prabhuji talks about, that we started to delve into in the previous class, is enduring. It's substantial. It's independent of what happens in this level of the matter, of the body, of the mind, of the senses. And that our notion of freedom, which is attributed to the level of the senses, is not true freedom, cannot stand for true freedom, because we do not have freedom in this level of the body and of the mind. And just the opposite, not only that this type of freedom does not bring to us freedom, or this false notion about freedom, if we will pursue it, try to have less and less limitation, enjoy more and more the body, the senses, or the mind even, not only we are not going to tap into the ultimate freedom on which Prabhuji talks about and that we want as spiritual seekers, but we will increase our limitations. We will be more and more in slavery. The more we let our mind indulge in sense enjoyment and satisfy all its whims and desires, we will be more miserable, more dependent on things. We will feel more limitations. So this path is not going to bring us into freedom. And in these words, Prabhuji distinguishes between what we think about freedom and what really freedom is. Again, an analysis that we also met in the previous class. The real freedom, that rishis talk to us about when they speak about moksha, that saints and sages talk to us about, that Prabhuji refers to in this word, is not lack of limitations. This is not freedom. And another point that we find here in these words of Prabhuji, that are actually conveyed through the words of George Bernard Shaw, is that most people dread this freedom. And again, we met this principle in the previous article when Prabhuji conveyed to us, not necessarily we want to be free. And we spoke about it. We might perceive ourselves as individuals who want freedom, who appreciate freedom, who esteem freedom, who advocate freedom. But if we take a closer analysis and look really what do we want, we might find that we are favoring comfort, order, answers, somebody else that will guide us, not necessarily to be totally free individuals, because this freedom on which we are hearing here is very expensive. It demands of us sacrifice. It demands of us bravery. It demands of us to take responsibility, which is the point that is conveyed in this article. We cannot only enjoy, have no suffering, have no limitations, without taking the responsibility that the freedom includes. What does it mean, this responsibility? Everything that we do will have consequences. We are the designers of our life. We cannot just enjoy in life and feel free in life without owning life, owning our own life. So the understanding that anything that happened to us, we are responsible for it. And whatever will happen to us, which means what we choose right now, we are responsible for it, is what will actually bring real freedom into our life. Not distance it away, but just the opposite. The lack of freedom is when we try to dismiss the responsibility and to rely on others. It's because of this, it's because of this person, it's because of this situation, it's because of my parents, etc., etc., etc. Then we will never be free because nothing depends on us. Then we are judging ourselves into dependency because we will always be dependent. So how can we be free? So if we want to be free, first we need to claim responsibility on our lives. And I think that oftentimes this is not so easy to do, because many things that happen to us in life are really not our fault. We really entered into a specific situation. Of course, we refer to the childhood, when different things happened to us and we did not choose them. And they created in us different habits, different reactions, different difficulties, etc., etc., different specific character. And in a sense, we feel it's not our fault. It's not our responsibility. We just reacted in the most natural way that everyone else would in the same circumstances. And I think that we are right. But if we want to tap into the freedom on which Prabhuji talks about, we must understand that as mature beings, now everything is in our hands. Regardless of whatever happened to us, of whoever caused us a specific uncomfortable situations that generated specific results, regardless of this, we have the full option, full freedom to respond. And this is all depends only on us. No one is going to help us. And if we choose not to take this opportunity, take this point of view in life, we will continue to feel limited. We will continue to feel dependent. We will continue to feel that we simply react to the past and nothing is our fault. So in a way, Prabhuji talks to us about the point, in my opinion, that this freedom is something that we choose. And to tap into this freedom again, we must assume responsibility. Not the guru, not the divine. No one can do it for us. As individuals, we must claim it. We must understand that the conditioned mind lacks freedom. Such a mind may dream of being free, but it only responds according to its conditioning. Freedom, however, is not about responding indiscriminately to all of our mental and emotional demands. Jean-Jacques Rousseau said, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." As long as our yearning for liberation is born from oppression, we will seek to escape its bonds rather than free ourselves. We often think that if the oppressing element vanishes, we will be free. Hence, our attention is focused on the chains, on what we desire to be liberated from, rather than on freedom itself. So here Prabhuji goes deep into this point that we are seeking freedom as a conditioned mind. The conditioned mind will never be free. It in itself is slavery. The conditioned mind is in fact our only slavery. And we see here that Prabhuji tells us when we focus on the limitation from which we want to be liberated, we keep our attention on the limitation and we don't move into freedom. The same principle that we met in the previous class. We're dealing with freedom from, and as we saw, freedom from is not freedom. Because if you want to be free from disease, we are thinking about the disease. Our state of mind is colored by this disease. If you want to be free from school, we are occupied with school, not with freedom. We are not tapping into freedom. And here Prabhuji tells us, as conditioned minds, again, we are not experiencing freedom. We can think about freedom, speak about freedom, say that we want freedom, but have nothing to do with freedom. We cannot touch freedom. And I think that we can think about it as if we have in our experience two levels of experiences that we saw, of course, in all the articles in different ways. One level is the mental activity, which we can compare it into a machine. And the other level is the essence, life itself. And all of us experience both. So we have this machine that reacts, that is bound, that desires, that reproduce certain habits. But it's all mechanic. It's all because of specific programs that condition us to act in a certain way. This is why we are all different, because every one of us had different experiences that created a different machine. This is our mind, our habits. The fact that we know how each one of us is going to behave or is going to react to a specific situation is because we're mechanic. We know each other already. We're not going to act freely, genuinely at the moment because we are machines. The other aspect that we have in us is life itself, which we all, of course, have access to. It's us. This is why we feel limited, because we want to be free like we are in essence, which is life. We don't want to be this machine that is closed, that is conditioned, that is limited. But we are also the machine. And Prabhuji does to us this distinction. As the machine, we will never be free. The mind does not even want freedom. This is not true. The mind wants freedom from. It wants to keep on enjoying. It wants to feel less inhibitions, less suffering, only enjoyment. But this is not the freedom that is coming from our essence, from life. Life is not limited. It does not experience a limitation. Everything is okay for life. But the mind is the one also that suffers. So this distinction is very significant for us when we are dealing with this topic of freedom. When we speak about sadness, frustration, anger, all the emotions, they may seem to us not mechanic, right? Not cold. They are the most mechanic in us. This is again why each and every one of us reacts in a very specific way emotionally. We have emotional patterns. All these emotions are part of the machine, part of the mind. And again, as a conditioned machine, as a conditioned mind, we have nothing to do with freedom. Freedom is not relevant to us. Now we should understand what responsibility is. Many people link it to duty. We think that being responsible means fulfilling our obligations diligently. Furthermore, we hold ourselves accountable if we fail to meet them. This idea is both incomplete and superficial. The deeper meaning of the term responsibility, which comes from the Latin responsum, is the ability to respond. If we live like sleepwalkers, we cannot respond properly. So now we are going to delve into the term responsibility, the second term. What is responsibility? We understood that we are responsible for our actions, that the current situation in which we are situated is a result of specific things that we did or did not do in the past, specific decisions. We understand that the future is going to be determined by our current choices. But how do we assume this responsibility in this moment? How does a responsible person looks? And also here Prabhuji distinguishes again between the common perception about this term and what can be revealed to us in a closer look if we examine more deeply and try to understand what really is responsibility. Our notion of responsibility, oftentimes, in most cases, is that we are performing specific actions, doing our duties, checking some to-do list that is considered responsible. I think that this is what Prabhuji tells us when he says that most people think that taking responsibility is to perform our duty. And here he uses the word duty not in the sense of the higher duty, but our duties, what we are supposed to do, what we should do, what is expected of us to do, what we think that we need to do, what we think that a responsible person is supposed to do. We have a list of things that we are supposed to check, and the more we do them, we might feel more responsible, or others might recognize us as more responsible. Prabhuji tells us this has nothing to do with authentic responsibility. Responsibility does not depend on others, but it's the ability to respond properly to life. And again, as always, we go back with Prabhuji into the state of awareness, of being present, of being at the now. Only there we are also responsible. We said only there we are free, also only there we are truly responsible. We are responding properly. We are communicating with awareness and not in a mechanic way that is based on the past, that is based on ideas, that is based on others' expectations, but has nothing to do with our authentic experience at the moment. A responsible person, Prabhuji tells us, is someone who is in deep communication with life. And from this communication, he will respond properly in the most responsible manner. This is truly to be responsible, because we are assuming the choice that we do to ourselves, not to someone else, not to something else. We don't reproduce, we don't repeat, we don't imitate, but we really take responsibility by listening, by examining, by thinking, by feeling, and doing our own actions as we understand as the best actions to do. Once we do something from this genuine, authentic place, we will take responsibility on the consequences. We are definitely owning this any decision that is coming from really ourselves and not from anything external. But in order to be in this level, we need to disconnect from what we are supposed to do, from all the expectations, from the past, from the known, from the convenient, from our ideas, from our mental conditioning, and really be present, and then we can perform actions with responsibility. And from this place, Prabhuji will reveal to us, we are acting in the most favorable way for others. We do not act in order to satisfy others, in order to feel okay, out of the fear of being not accepted. This is not our motive. But the result will be, the outcome, that we are really listening to others, caring, benefiting, because we don't act out of our egoistic desires, but out of awareness, out of listening. Yastva atmaratir eva syad atma truptascha manavaha atman yevacha santushtas tasya karyamna vidyate. But for him who rejoices only in the self, who is satisfied with the self and who is content with the self alone, there is truly no duty. Bhagavad Gita 3:17. This beautiful verse, it's a verse that Prabhuji opens a book that he now writes about the topic of being in Western philosophy. And we bring it here in the context of the duties of this world versus the authentic responsibility. And what we see in this verse is that Krishna tells us that one who is established in the being, occupied with the being, listens to the being, for him there is no duty in this world. In a way we can say this is our highest duty. Krishna tells Arjuna and all of us, once we are taking on ourselves this duty, we are released of all other duties. And I think that we can wonder, how come we speak in relation to the state of meditation as something that is related to our responsibility, to the state of freedom, to the state of being present, right? All of which we can see as synonymous to the word meditation. Ultimately, we understand from Prabhuji slowly, step by step, that actually responsibility is freedom. Freedom is consciousness. Consciousness is meditation. Meditation is to be in the now. Different terms, different aspects that lead us to the same state. The state that we aspire to be situated as what we call spiritual aspirants. We want to be on this state, in this state that is transcendental to the mind, that is not mechanic, that is authentic, that is connected to life. And in relation to this state, we oftentimes think about it and also hear about it from Prabhuji and other saints and sages and rishis, that it is not a state that is dependent on us at all, right? We hear it. There is nothing that we can do to force meditation. There is no action that we can do to produce spiritual development. This retroprogressive evolution on which Prabhuji talks about, it's not related to actions, to methods, to techniques. So how come now we hear about the same state that we might have understood? It has nothing to do with us. We can only pray for it, hope. How come we relate to the same state in the light of the understanding that everything depends on us, that we need to be responsible, that we need to be present, that we need to respond to life properly in this very moment, or else we won't tap into freedom, we won't tap into life. And interestingly, these two aspects is something that we dealt with when we spoke about the article about waking up the dawn. It's an article, a beautiful article, when Prabhuji speaks about the point that only we can wake ourselves up. No one can do it for us. Again, speaks about the same aspect of taking responsibility. And there, in the classes that we dealt with this article, we spoke about this apparent contradiction that in essence, it's not contradiction. Both aspects coming from the same state of meditation, of being present, of taking responsibility, of being attentive to the grace, receptive to the grace. And also in the previous article, interestingly, Prabhuji talks to us about the point where, in reference to responsibility, that responsibility is not when we are released from captivity, and he compared to the people of Israel, that they assume responsibility or were free, not when they left Egypt. This was only to be released from captivity, but when they accepted the Torah accepted responsibility. And we didn't talk a lot about it in the previous class, about a specific example. But interestingly, both in this example and also in this article that Prabhuji talks about waking up the dawn, we see that by taking a spiritual authority, we in fact exercise our responsibility. We in fact claim our freedom. And we can ask, how come we still speak about an authority? We might think that we become more submissive, more dependent, less free, with less ability to live our own life. We're following something else, someone else, some scripture, some religion, etc. So how these two can reconcile this path of taking a spiritual authority and the path of freedom, of being free beings. We might think or connect more easily in our minds freedom to something like existentialism that claims that there is nothing above us, no higher authority, no heaven, no hell, it's only us here, and we are free to make our own decisions because we have complete freedom. And Prabhuji connects this freedom with the spiritual authority. And what I understand from this, I think we can look at it in the light of what we spoke, that in this existence, we cannot be free from limitations. We cannot be free from consequences. We can also not be free from authority, from some truths that we follow. But we can choose which one we want to follow. We can choose to follow the material pursuit and bear the material consequences. Or we can detach ourselves from the material pursuit and adopt a spiritual search and situate ourselves in other laws. But we cannot dismiss ourselves completely of responsibility. As we saw in the words of Krishna, if we are taking upon ourselves, the being is our authority, not even a religion. Not even a spiritual authority, that the being itself, life itself, this is our authority. We are dismissed of all other duties, but we need to surrender to this duty to really connect with the being, to really listen to the being, to really follow the being. So, completely free, it's impossible again, as bodies, as minds, as individuals, on this planet, in this world. But we can choose again what rules we want to follow, what guidelines we want to adopt, or what authority we want to assume on ourselves. And free individuals can be beings that do not accept any external authority, and maybe not even religion, as we find in existentialism. But they do obey to this moment, to themselves, to listening, to being present, to their responsibility. They are not free beings in the sense of having no limitations, of having no consequences to their actions. We are all subject to conditions. We are all subject to having consequences. We are all dependent on other beings. But we can again choose our particular path in which we mold our particular life and decide what beings we want to follow, what contents we want to listen to, with what objects we want to associate, what books we want to read. We cannot be detached from material influence, from any object, but we can choose. And as I understand, beings that are attempting to have the being as their authority will choose the authorities that are favorable for their connection with the being. Will choose the actions that are favorable for their listening to the being, situating in the being. They will choose the people that they want to listen to, or of course they may choose the guru that they want to surrender to, out of placing the being as the highest authority in their lives. So responsibility, Prabhuji tells us, is not duties in the common sense of doing many actions, but it's the ultimate duty that we have as human beings to respond to life, to be present, to live, to make decisions, our own decisions, and not decisions of someone else or something else. Responsibility means responding appropriately to life's events with all our capacity. If we were all responsible, we would not need laws, judges, or policemen. But since society is made up of immature people, governments resort to control to maintain order. A higher state of consciousness would allow us to adequately respond to life and to make this world a paradise. So here we are introduced to another term out of the 4 terms that we mentioned. We said we are going to examine with Prabhuji what is freedom, what is responsibility, what is discipline, what is control. Now we're talking about control. Prabhuji tells us that the way that society finds to prevent us from acting in inappropriate ways is by placing control in our life, by limiting our ability to act. By limiting this ability to act, we might be able to isolate very extreme cases from very specific actions that can be very harmful. So we minimize a little the harmful effect. But we do not address the root cause of these perverted actions. Control, what Prabhuji tells us, is not going to address the root cause of the actions that we do without awareness that cause harm to others. Just the opposite. Control creates in us disconnection from awareness, from ourselves. And then we can be more and more harmful to others until extreme cases that we need to sit behind bars because we are going to act so inappropriately in such a harmful manner. But what Prabhuji tells us, this external control is the only resort that society finds to eliminate all these negative influences. However, if we want as individuals to produce more harmonious actions, we will not be able to do it with placing more and more control and more limitations. What we want to is bring awareness. Just the opposite. To reveal what is underneath actions that we are not liking, that we are not proud of, that we want to prevent. If we will limit ourselves, we will not produce in us more harmony, and therefore we are not going to project more harmony and help others feel more harmony. Prabhuji tells us that if we were all free and responsible, we would not need this control, and we would act in a much more harmonious manner that we do now as society. This world would be a paradise, Prabhuji tells us. We will be so considerate, so thoughtful, so aware, so much listening, so much respectful to all other individuals as being free individuals, as to ourselves as being free individuals. There would be no conflict between us. The only conflicts that existing between us are coming because of this artificial control that we try to put as society as a whole and as individuals, that we will find more in the following words that we are going to read. This control is the result not only of us as a society, but also us as individuals. We try to limit ourselves so we won't do specific actions, but the external limitations, the external control will never eliminate the root cause of the problematic actions or behavior that we want to eliminate. It will not create in us beauty. It will not create in us harmony. It will not create in us authentic kindness. It can prevent us from doing specific actions, as it prevents from criminals to do specific actions. It does not treat these personalities and turn them into aware beings. It just isolates the problems from the society and the society from the problems. But the problems stay in the society with this mentality that seeks external control as means for improving ourselves. Every moment and situation is a call and requires a response that satisfies the demands of life. Unfortunately, many such invitations remain unanswered because we are not present. Due to our conditioning, we are stuck in memories of the past or hopes for the future. We are absent from the present and from reality. We suffer because we cannot adequately respond to life's invitations. There is no one in the universe who can respond as we would. But in order to respond in our own style, we have to transcend conditioning and regain the ability to listen. Prabhuji tells us this life is a dialogue. It constantly speaks to us, but we do not respond. We do not listen. We're busy in the limitations, in the past, in the emotional reactions, mechanical emotional reactions, in our ideas, in fear, not in listening to life that is constantly talking to each and every one of us, Prabhuji says. And not only, we have inside us an amazing, genuine, authentic, beautiful being that is going to respond to life in a very unique and precious way. No one else can live life as we can. But if we are going to suffocate this beautiful being, we will never know it. We ourselves, not only the world will not know us, we won't know the potential that is existing in us because we are limiting ourselves, because we are blocking ourselves with rules and regulations. The invitation that Prabhuji presents to us here is to pay attention, to be present, and to respond to whatever life demands of us in this moment. And the more we will make room in our lives for listening, which is the topic of the next paragraph that we are going to read, the more we will be able to cooperate with this dialogue and free this individual that is jailed inside us, inside our body-mind complex, inside our self-image that has specific demands of ourselves, that wants us to be in a certain way and not to be in another way, etc., etc. This is full of fears and desires and is very obedient to what others would think about it. If we are going to listen to life in this moment, we are going to minimize the influence of these demands of the self-image and increase the ability to communicate with life, to conduct this dialogue with life, to speak with life, to answer, to listen. That again, Prabhuji tells us this is not only reserved to specific beings, to special beings, what we call enlightened or saint, but this is related to each and every one of us. Life is communicating with all of us. And Prabhuji invites us to listen to life and to cooperate with life. And by this we are going to be responsible and be free and not by control. So out of these terms, we spoke about freedom, we spoke about responsibility, and we see the control as the obstacle. The control is the external program that can come from us or from others, but that is going to inhibit our freedom, inhibit our responsibility. If we want to release ourselves of this control, we want to be more present, more in communication with life, and more listening, which is the topic that Prabhuji will speak to us in the following words. So let's read. The Sanskrit term sādhanā means to listen. Listening with precision requires silence, as it is impossible to talk and simultaneously perceive what someone is saying. As silence intensifies, attention sharpens. The inner stillness that the sādhanā requires is not absence of noise, but of preconceived ideas, concepts, conclusions, and mental fluctuations. Surely, the first step of the retroprogressive path is cultivating receptivity. Cultivate listening. When you have a doubt related to your health, listen to your body. When you are not sure what direction you should take in life, listen carefully to existence deep within your heart. Those who cultivate the art of receptive and alert listening find silence and peace. Only if we are consciously present in the now will the ability to respond flourish in us. Inner responsibility is born when we are attuned to the present. Responding appropriately requires being in tune with the now. So again, we are always getting to the same state from different trails with Prabhuji, from listening, from responsibility, from freedom, and we meet here again the point of the now, of being present that we spoke in the previous chapter. Only by being present we can be in communication with life and in listening. Here in this words, Prabhuji talks about the importance of the listening, and he tells us for sure this is the first step of the retroprogressive path. Listening. Before we choose, before we perform actions, before we go to meditate, to practice, to do this, not to do this, we want to listen. We want to absorb. We want to be receptive. And only from listening we are going to go deeper and deeper into the retroprogressive yoga path. Listening is the foundation of this path. To be in communication, and here Prabhuji guides us regarding any situation, any problem, any conflict, any distress, physical, emotional, mental, intellectual. Listen. Stop and listen. And again, as we met in the previous words, life is communicating with us. We will get the answers if only we allow quiet in our lives. Currently, we do not hear because we are not allowing quiet in our lives. So we are projecting, but we do not listen. Prabhuji tells us the first step of this evolutionary process, the retroprogressive process, is in listening. In the Bhakti Yoga book, Prabhuji brings the 9 steps of Bhakti Yoga, of the path of love of God, the relationship with the divine. And also there, beautifully, we find the first step as being Shravanam, or listening. Shravanam in the Sanskrit word for listening, that is also mentioned here in this words of Prabhuji. And we also find it in the first step of the Bhakti Yoga process. This process, again, that Prabhuji elaborates in his book about Bhakti Yoga, speaks about different stages of communication with the divine, of loving the divine, of worshipping the divine, of praying to the divine, of developing a relationship with the divine as a friend. This process will culminate in complete surrender. But the first step, before we praise the divine, is to listen. Let's mention these steps in this context. This is based on a verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam that is spoken from the lips of the great devotee Prahlada Maharaj, who says, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmani, Vedanam. Shravanam, or listening, Kirtanam, glorifying, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, remember the divine in all circumstances, always, no matter what happens to us, we want to remember the Lord, remember the divine. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, to serve the divine, to offer service. Archanam, to worship the divine. Vandanam, to pray to the divine, to communicate with the divine. Dasyam, to serve the divine. Sakyam, to develop a relationship with the divine as intimate friend. We have some relationship with the divine. And Atmani Vedanam, full surrender. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmani Vedanam. I hope we didn't forget any step. But this particular process that he speaks in relation to the devotional path of Krishna consciousness, of the relationship with Krishna, we can also apply more in a general sense, and also in relation to the Shravanam. Prabhuji mentions that although in the context of the Krishna Bhakti Yoga, it speaks about Shravanam to the Leelas, to the pastimes of Krishna, what is important in this state is the listening itself, is the state of listening. And the same thing we can apply to Kirtanam, glorifying the divine, etc., all these steps. So all these steps guide us how to develop this connection with the divine, with the transcendence, with the beyond. All of these steps are significant and can help us. But the basic, as we found in relation to the retroprogressive yoga that Prabhuji tells us, that the beginning is the listening. Listening we can also interpret as receptivity, is being open, is accepting that we do not know, that we allow something else to come into us, to teach us, to guide us, to reveal to us truth, to reveal to us light by being receptive. If we are all knowing, if we are only projecting, as oftentimes we are as egos, we think that we know, everything is ordered and we have a lot of explanations, well-built narratives about our lives and about other people and about so many other topics, we are not receptive. If we know, then truth cannot come into us. But if we accept that we do not know, we open ourselves, then we listen. And if we listen, Prabhuji tells us, we will hear. We will hear life, we will hear the divine, and we will be able to develop this relationship with the transcendental in whatever path each individual walks. Responsibility is discipline. By learning something, we respond, and by responding, we learn. To be able to ride a bicycle, for example, we need to learn how to respond. If the bicycle tilts to the left, we lean to the right, and vice versa. With a lot of attention, observation, and presence, we respond to the various situations that the learning process requires. It is impossible to separate responsibility from learning. Responsibility is discipline. Responding is learning. So now we are introduced into the fourth term, which is discipline. Very related to what we just spoke in relation to Shravanam or listening. True learning is not in just getting a list of ideas, writing them down, and then memorizing them and then projecting them. In order to really learn, we need to be present. And to this, we can see that Prabhuji refers to as discipline, to really be disciples. Discipline, Prabhuji tells us, is interconnected with responsibility. If we are responsible, we are disciplined. We are learning. We are attentive. Everything is significant. If we need to decide, for example, on a specific situation, if it's our responsibility, we are much more aware. We're much more listening. We're much more careful because it's on our shoulders, so to say. In the same way, to a greater extent or in a more principal way, if we are responsible in our lives as individuals, we are disciples. There is a term that Prabhuji speaks about in relation to Judaism. In Judaism, the name that is given to the masters are wise students or wise disciples. And Prabhuji speaks about this beautiful definition to a spiritual master, which means that he is simply a more experienced disciple. He is not less obedient, but much more obedient. So we follow this individual, whoever follows a spiritual master, because this individual is such a great disciple. And we are too much knowing, too much projecting, too much dogmatic. We cannot listen. So we want the help of someone who is expert in being open, in being receptive, in being disciplined. Not discipline in the sense, again, that we have as a concept of discipline that can be act in a very routinary way, following guidelines, following specific instructions, doing specific things, avoiding other things, right? This is what we normally interpret as discipline. Also in relation to this term, we distinguish between our more ordinary, typical understanding of the term and what can be revealed to us with a closer look. Really, discipline is to learn. And Prabhuji tells us, in order to learn, we cannot be passive, as we sometimes do in school. Just be passive, write everything down, and then be passive and project it. But we are constantly absorbing, constantly curious, constantly responsible, aware, responding, listening, interacting, in communication. Only then, as in the example of riding a bicycle that Prabhuji gives to us, we can really master this art. If you put a child on a bicycle that still didn't master the riding, and he is not interested and not present, he has no chances, he or she, to be able to ride. The child that we see sitting on a bicycle in the first time is full of awareness, full of enthusiasm. He can fall and try again and fall and try again, but he's constantly learning. He's constantly responding. And he will teach himself, ultimately. We cannot really teach someone to ride a bicycle. We can create maybe favorable conditions and some guidelines that might help. But ultimately, each individual teaches himself to ride a bicycle, to swim, etc. And these activities we learn by responding, by trying and failing, and by listening, by communication. So Prabhuji tells us, discipline, in fact, is responsibility. They are not different. After we spoke about control, that we understood control is not responsibility. It's some external demands that we put on ourselves, either again by our own selves or by others, that is disconnected from us and from life. Discipline, just the opposite, is to be in complete communication with ourselves and with life. Discipline, as we understand from Prabhuji, is not something of the mass, as again we might think in our typical perception of the word discipline. We might think that if we are disciplined, everyone is going to act the same, to do the same actions. If we see maybe some community that everyone is following a very rigid routine, we can think they are very disciplined. Prabhuji tells us just the opposite. Discipline is of the individuals. We're not going to be similar to anyone else. When we learn to ride the bicycle, we are disconnecting from the world and we are connected to our own feelings, emotions, understanding to the bicycle, and we are learning now. We are not following any other external authority. We can, at a certain point, stop to listening to our dad that tries to help us, and we are going to master this riding on the bicycle. The same thing, in discipline, we are more individuals because we need to listen to life in the specific way that life communicates with us. When we notice our own unacceptable, undesirable, or indecent inclinations, we often try to repress them by exerting control. Yet, this resistance is still an egoistic assessment for our personal convenience. Even our ambition for freedom falls into the same category. The ego may be controlled, but it will remain an ego nonetheless. This control or misunderstood discipline does not help us eliminate our inclinations, but only repress them. Repressive control hardens us and creates a conflict between what I am and what I should be, between what I see and what I should be seeing. Hiding our internal conflict, we become atrophied and lose agility. Although repressed and restricted, these undesirable inclinations continue to live and move within us. So here we see, just as in the case of the society, when we want a society to deal with criminals, we try to put specific individuals that act negatively behind bars to isolate ourselves from this undesirable behavior. we do just the same as individuals. When we recognize things that we are not proud of, that we don't want to be part of our image, that we think are not acceptable, that we think are not beautiful, we try to put them behind bars and not allow ourselves to act in this way. In this way, Prabhuji tells us, we are not treating, again, the root cause of these inclinations, but only suppressing them, and they remain alive in us. We will not get rid of them. We will not be free from them. Only by awareness we can really liberate all these demons, we can say, all these patterns that are a result of specific difficult situations or unfavorable situations that we went through. What we see here is that the image itself is our jail. Prabhuji tells us even the desire for freedom that is coming from the mind is slavery. Even the fact that we want to be free is just because we are not free. So as we said, when we want to avoid difficulty, to run away from suffering, when we seek relief and happiness in the level of the mind, we do not want freedom. We want comfort. We want escape. And this desire is in itself the slavery. Once we will embrace life with the discomfort that they bring, we can be more free. We are more in reality. But the conditioned mind, as we said, is in itself the jail. We are closing ourselves behind bars, as we said. The bars are the self-image and not allowing life to manifest through us because we are afraid of all kinds of unpredicted expressions of ourselves that we are not familiar with even. We don't know who we are really, how we would have acted without all these demands that we have from the self-image. But the same control that we spoke as being problematic in the sense of the creating a favorable, harmonious, kind society, a paradise, is also what prevents paradise in our own subjective world, internal world. We are dividing ourselves between what we are supposed to be and how we really feel like being. So there are two. We are fractured, Prabhuji tells us. There is separation. What we see and what we should see. Two different things, completely opposite. But we prefer to live in this division and hide more and more what we do see, what we do feel, how we want to act, suppress it more and more so it will never come into the surface. By this, Prabhuji tells us, we keep it alive. But once we are bringing awareness, relaxation, attention, acceptance, and less control, we will not only diminish the negative forces in us, but we'll really discover what is our authentic way to act. Because currently all this package is put together behind bars. Our authenticity is also put together behind bars, together with the unfavorable expressions of ourselves or things that we interpret as being shameful, not favorable, not acceptable, etc. You are still not free. You seek freedom. Your seeking made you sleep deprived and over awake. You aspire to the free heights. Your soul thirsts for the stars. But your wicked instinct also thirsts for freedom. Your wild dogs want to get free. They bark with joy in their cellar when your spirit contrives to liberate all prisons. To me, you are still a prisoner who plots his freedom. Alas, the soul of such prisoners grows clever, but also deceptive and rotten. The one who is free of spirit must still purify himself. Much prison and mold is left in him. His eyes must still become pure. Thus spoke Zarathustra, Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay, so we hear in this beautiful quote that Prabhuji brings from the lips of Nietzsche, from Thus Spoke Zarathustra, about a state, Nietzsche speaks, that we might crave true freedom. We maybe touched it. We want the stars, we want the height, we listen to the words of the sages and they appeal to us so much. We listen to Prabhuji and we want to be in this state, dimensionless state. And yet we can still be in a situation that we are, as body and minds, are very attached to the slavery. Nietzsche says your spirit can aspire to the stars, to the heights, but your wicked instincts still also strive for freedom. And the freedom of the instincts and the freedom of the soul are two different experiences. As we spoke, opposite, not just unrelated. Nietzsche speaks here about the dogs that bark with joy when we speak about freedom, when we want freedom, when we plan freedom. Our dogs that are currently in the jail, that we suppress them and put them in the cellar, also want to break free, to satisfy their whims and desires. We spoke in this in the context of the master-disciple relationship, that we can touch in the presence of the master, that transcendence, and crave it, and want to be situated there. We touched it, we feel that we are at home. But between us and this situation, when we are really feeling at home constantly, in all circumstances, in most cases there is a long path that we need to liberate the past, as Prabhuji told us in previous articles. This past constitutes us. It still lives in us. So between the moment that we again crave the heights and the complete liberation from the past, from the wicked instinct on which Nietzsche speaks about, from the dogs on which Nietzsche refers to, there is a journey of liberation of this past. And this journey is, as Prabhuji reveals to us again and again and again and again and again, by listening, attention, awareness, receptivity. We want to liberate these dogs, but not by letting them live in us and satisfy their whims and desires. What Nietzsche tells us here is that when we want to be free, when our soul wants to be free, and we as individuals want to pursue this thirst of the soul, also our dogs are very happy because they think we are going to give them everything they want and they will be liberated in this freedom. But this distinction is very significant. The freedom for the dogs can put us in a very unfavorable situation if we just let them act out of their desires. And our freedom as individuals is the responsibility. To let our dogs act in freedom, this is to be completely irresponsible. Irresponsible of others, irresponsible of ourselves, irresponsible of the consequences, irresponsible to life and to the communication with what is harmonious, with what is favorable. So Prabhuji does speak about paying attention to these dogs, not keep them chained in the jail and ignore them and eliminate them. But of course not also let them dictate our life and be free, because they are very dangerous. But we want to bring to them attention and in the retroprogressive path gradually eliminate them with awareness, with compassion, with attention. So in a way, as I see it, Prabhuji brings the words of Nietzsche in the context of control. And I think that the link that we can make between these words and the control is that as conditioned minds, we are controllers. As controllers, we have inside us dogs that are inside this cellar and are just waiting to break free because they are suppressed. The control is what created these wicked instincts, these dogs, these unfavorable behaviors in us, because we didn't respect ourselves as individuals and assumed control on ourselves. We limited ourselves. We put ourselves as criminals behind bars. We treated our own selves in the same way. And in this treatment, what we will create is that these forces will only wait for the opportunity that they can express. They might break free as well because they are existing. We didn't get rid of them yet. And it just says there is a process until will be really in alignment with this desire for the heights. There is still much mold in us, even though we might crave the heights. And this mold is a result of our control and of our suppressions of everything that was aroused in us and reinterpreted as negative, as unfavorable, as unacceptable. By pushing them down, we make this load heavier and heavier. And in order to liberate ourselves from the past, Prabhuji tells us we need to go through this process of awareness, of attention, in order to bring light into these dark places, which will eliminate their existence. What will eliminate the existence of the dark places, of the dogs, of the wicked instinct, of the mold, is awareness, is reality, because in essence they are not real, but they are just mental projections of our own selves. Control paralyzes certain inclinations and creates habits. It turns living beings into robots and destroys intelligence and creativity. Control shrinks us. It impels us to perform specific actions and aggravates our conditioning. Clearly, freedom is not acquired through control because we cannot be free within our conditioning, whether positive or negative. To reach freedom and responsibility, sensitivity is required. Sensitivity is not cultivated by control, but with discipline. Therefore, it is necessary to separate the terms discipline and control, because although they sound similar, they are completely different. Okay, so Prabhuji summarizes by the understanding that discipline and control are complete opposite of one another. We understood what is discipline, we understood what is control, and we can already conclude easily ourselves these are two opposites. The control is what is going to inhibit our ability to learn. Discipline is the attentive communication with life, with the situation, with the bicycle, with whatever activity we are attempting to master. Control is what is going to make us afraid, suppressed, disconnected, and not create favorable conditions for the learning process. It will only demand of us energy in hiding, suppressing, reacting in a very specific way, and for this we must be disconnected from the reality in order to continue and maintain all this program. The word discipline comes from the Latin term discipulus, which in turn is derived from the discere or disco, i.e., one who learns or one who has an aptitude for learning. People relate discipline to control, but these two are totally different. Control is a series of laws, rules, and regulations, while discipline is born of understanding and awareness. Many think that it is necessary to dominate animal nature, yet control is also part of the egoic phenomenon. Control assaults our nature, whereas discipline is spontaneous and blossoms out of consciousness. Okay, so here Prabhuji elaborates again in the understandings that we already discussed. Discipline and control are two opposites. Discipline is of the individual and not of the mass. It's an integrative process, an alive process, an authentic process. Control is mechanic, is external, and it is going to be unfavorable for true learning. Free beings, and therefore responsible beings, require no control, for they are aware of their own needs and those of others. Those who are unconscious and irresponsible have to be controlled because they lack the sensitivity to respond to existence. Conscious beings are disciplined but free of control. They live awake like seagulls flying high, in total freedom, without laws or rules. And now we're getting closer to the end of the article. And in the next words that we are going to read, we are receiving a summary of the connection of all these terms that we analyzed together with Prabhuji. Freedom, responsibility, discipline, and control. The 4 terms that Prabhuji told us are necessary in order to build our answer. Isn't responsibility an obstacle to freedom? We want to understand in depth all these 4 terms. Now Prabhuji ties everything together as a summary. So let's hear. Now we shall examine how freedom, discipline, and responsibility are related. Discipline in its true meaning is learning, not in the sense of accumulating knowledge or information, but in the sense of perceiving and observing what is as it is. In order to learn, it is necessary to completely free ourselves from all accumulated information. Otherwise, instead of observing what is, we will project what we know on what we are learning. We will not observe reality, but only what we grasp according to our conditioning. The freedom to perceive and to observe is essential for learning. If we wish to study ourselves, we must get rid of all beliefs, concepts, and conclusions about what we are. This kind of learning is responsibility, because it is a response to existence. So in these words of Prabhuji, we are tying together all the 4 terms. We are understanding that discipline means to learn. And in this true learning, not of accumulating information, but in being completely attentive and responding, we are in fact in responsibility. We understand that this responsibility is opposite than control, than external control. So in this final summary, in fact, we find 3 terms, which is freedom, responsibility, and discipline, as completely connected, united, or we can say as one. We can understand that in fact freedom is responsibility, and responsibility is discipline. All of them are in fact one and the same. While at the other side we find the control, the external control that is not favorable for the other 3, freedom, responsibility, and discipline, but that can only inhibit our freedom, disturb our ability to learn, to respond, to be responsible, and to be disciplined. Society confuses control with discipline because it maintains a semblance of order by controlling unconscious people. Unlike imposed order, discipline reveals the harmony of life. Trying to control our thoughts will not help us create inner order. Inner harmony can be discovered only by observing our mental activity. From within the known, our reaction will always be mechanical. Only when we become free from all conditioning and respond to the call of existence will we act responsibly. Once we transcend memory, we will respond consciously. To be responsible is to be disciplined. An irresponsible being has to be motivated or impelled through control. Only those who are responsible can learn. No, dear friend, responsibility is not an obstacle to your freedom. Responsibility and discipline are implicit in freedom. Jai Prabhuji.